son was, KJ, he was mercury poisoned from his silver fillings. It's really, really that simple. Over 8 months ago, he was perfectly healthy. He hadn't even had an antibiotic since he was a baby. On October the 8th, he had 2 very large fillings placed in on his right side, one on the top and one at the bottom. And 3 days later, he essentially got sick. He's been diagnosed with lupus, nephritis, that's a kidney disorder, and peripheral neuropathy. And peripheral neuropathy is nerve damage throughout the body, and this nerve damage almost left him paralyzed. I mentioned the mercury poisoning to the doctors, and essentially they just said that, you know, that didn't happen. People don't get sick from your fillings. It's very controversial, yada, 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 yada. And how long after KJ got the fillings did I notice the change? 3 days. Exactly 3 days. I remember it, so clearly, because he had a high fever of 102 to 102.9. I was waiting for it to cross that 103 barrier, because that's when they say you're supposed to go to the emergency room. At this time, I'm not thinking anything about the amalgams or any relationship to the dentist. So after the fever went away 3 days later, 2 days after that, he woke up in the morning with a swollen lip on his right side. And I thought that was a little odd. And then his health just started to deteriorate from there, and he would wake up with a swollen eye, and a couple hours later it would go away, and then it went down to his extremities. My primary care doctor was trying to convince me not to have the fillings removed, because he said it can be even more dangerous to have them removed. And that's actually true, because if they're not removed safely. I went on IAOMT.org. I spoke with Leo Cashman from DAMS. Prior to the removal, there was some mouth pain that happened because the mercury fillings were stirred up. Yes, whenever you go to get a dental checkup, etc., more mercury vapors are released than normal. And my son's mouth had gotten in so much pain that he couldn't even eat. And just sitting there, sitting there, he would drool, and he had to drink from a straw because it was just so hard for him. And when he did eat, he had to take his hands and he had to close his mouth with his lips, with his hands, and throw his head back so that he can force the muscles in his neck and his mouth to work so that he could swallow the food. And again, his primary care doctor, they're still trying to convince me that I shouldn't get these removed, and I just said I can't do that anymore. I'm taking them in. Insurance wouldn't cover it. I was just taking them in, and I had Dr. Layton remove them. Dr. Layton really took his time and explained to us the process. He used a rubber dam to protect the mercury from going into his lungs and throats. He also had a big vacuum hose and a lot of water to rinse as he removed the fillings. And from what I read, he used all the precautions necessary to make sure that the amalgams were removed safely. And would you know that 2 days later, he started to lose the pain in his mouth. 4 to 5 days later, the pain was completely gone. He was completely back to normal. He could eat again. He had lost 15 pounds in 10 days. So after he got his control of his mouth again, about 4 to 5 days later, he started to be able to walk again. It was just gradually he started to be able to walk again, and I was so excited. After removing the mercury fillings, I would say it was probably about 20 days total when he just couldn't walk at all anymore. although I was a Marine and I'm stronger than I look, it was just very difficult, and it was even more difficult for him because his body was just in so much pain that just to pick him up was just so painful. So essentially, KJ relapsed about 15 to 20 days later after having the amalgam removed, and I knew at that point that he needed chelation therapy because the mercury was still stored in his tissue. Wow, what insurmountable proof and data did I provide the doctors to convince them that KJ was mercury poisoned. I overwhelmed them with research, i.e. from the University of Washington, which was funded by NIH, that examined children for 7 years and found that for the first 2 years they had a high, children with amalgams, and they found that the first 2 years they had a higher concentration of of mercury in their urine. But what that same research also found is that boys were less likely to be able to excrete the mercury, making them more susceptible to toxicity. A la my son, if he's unable to excrete the mercury, it's going to make him sicker. Doctors, let's think about some common sense issues. You don't understand why the lupus is acting this way. Well, mercury could be making it act this way. I also gave them data from the University of Maryland, which showed that when they injected mice who had lupus with mercury, the mercury made the lupus progress at a more severe and faster rate than normal. Doctors, you can't understand why my son's lupus is acting and behaving the way it's acting. Then let's look at mercury. I did cause and effects. I also showed them that if they don't have a plausible explanation as to why his lupus is behaving this way, then they have to look at what I believe is a plausible explanation. And the cause and effect. Was there another cause for him to suddenly get sick? There was nothing different. I discussed that earlier. There was absolutely nothing different that we had done in the past. So that's how I convinced them. I gave them 2 notebooks. This is just one. 2 notebooks full of peer-reviewed documents and research from reputable people like Dr. Boyd Haley and University of Washington, University of Calgary, Ohio State, University of Iowa, Sweden, the World Health Organization. And I also mentioned that even the FDA now says that women who are pregnant and children under 6 should not use this because it's dangerous. But what about the pregnant women? I mean, there are so many things that people need to know about this mercury fillings. I will never call it silver fillings again. These mercury fillings, let's call it by its true definition. I can't sell you a Camaro with Corvette parts and say that it's a Corvette just because it has Corvette parts. This is mercury fillings with a little silver, so it has to be called by its name.